Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
All right, welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Yuri. So Yuri, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do for a living.
Hey Dan, thanks for having me. Right now I'm based in Israel, and I do a few different things. On the one side, I do HR consulting for tech startups, to some degree for Fortune 500 companies as well. And on the other side, I do PR, media relations for a variety of clients. And
Awesome.
I write books as well, produce a lot of content.
That's cool. So can you just talk about more like how you got started in this space? Because obviously it's a very competitive space. So what made you want to get into it, and what did that look like for you?
Okay, so let's start with the HR side of things. Very unorthodox, kind of a strange path. I don't think anyone wakes up, one day and says, I want to be in HR. It's like, let's have your head checked, buddy. Mm-hmm. For me, in terms of intellectual interests, I've always kind of wanted to combine anthropology, neuroscience, kind of language psychology, as banal as it sounds, to create a positive impact for as many people as possible. My channel for doing that, what I learned along the way, coaching more than 2,000 people over the last decade, working in HR, various other careers, which I'll mention a little later, is that essentially if I have any sort of superpower, it is around language and psychology, and it's really helping people rewire their conversations, right? So what I've done, I come from a background, and not to provide you with too many details, but essentially coming from the Soviet Union, growing up in a single parent family, being a Russian Jew who grew up in Kentucky. I've had about, 7 or 8 careers by this point. Started out in a neuroscience PhD program, left after a year, worked in law. I got a law degree, have the debt to prove it. Good for me, right? After law school in 2009, I worked in finance. From finance, after a few years, I was just like, this is hell. This is not for me. I went to work in technology, and I worked in very different roles: finance and operations, product, biz dev, pretty much every other hat. Helped to grow a few different startups, and then I started my own thing. I said, you know what, if I'm good at anything, it's pretty much at rewiring that conversation. So first I did it for myself again and again and again through different careers, and crazy things that happened to me. And then I started doing that for other people, for friends and then clients. Like, okay, this is very powerful stuff, right? What are the conversations? So this goes into my writing and my thought leadership. Essentially, if you want to think of Maslow's hierarchy, expanding that. Okay, so going from very basic needs up to, self-fulfilling. There's a lot of room to expand in between those. So let's say, the 4 conversations are: number 1, with your body. So what is your physical health? What does it look like? How do you listen to your body, learn to understand what it wants and needs, etc., and provide it? Number 2 is your mind. So in your mind, you have various mental models, you have certain life skills. Often many people miss those life skills because they didn't grow up with them. I went on paper to an Ivy League undergrad program and and I went to law school, and look at me, and I graduated with 0 real life skills. I had no idea how to manage my finances. I had no idea how to manage my career. I didn't know what the hell was a side hustle. How do you build a business? How do you manage expectations? How do you learn to learn, right? So I was always curious, and I collected a lot of information, almost like a human Google. Like when I was a kid, before there was a Google, that was my ambition. Like, I want to be that, going and essentially figuring out what is in my mental stack, what is my worldview, how do I manage all of these crazy things going on in my life? How do I rewire my mental models, going from, cognitive biases against myself, recognizing them, getting rid of them, or changing how I see myself, and then going to, how do I manage my finances? Because I'm more of an artist type. How do I think about growing my career because of all these crazy changes and career changes, life changes, etc. And then, how do I start a business? How do I build it? How do I really go through that? The third conversation is with other people. So how do I start and manage relationships and do it from a place of core values? And relationships, not just at work, not just with my, I don't know, boss and boss's boss and, my reports, but it's also, yeah, advisors, investors, oh, yeah, parents, spouse, kids. How do I think about those conversations? And then the last one, okay, you're all the way up at the mountain, kumbaya, right? I've made it. Not really. Right? What's your conversation with God or the universe? Why me? Why now? Why here? Why have I had to go through all these challenges? What is it all for? Something toward a meaning of life. So when you're at the top of the mountain, sure as hell you haven't figured everything out, but at least you know the stops along the way up the mountain, so that when you're faced with a challenge in life, maybe you have a kid, a year down the road, your time management goes to hell. You can go back and zoom in on that. You can really work on it, and then you can zoom back out and see your landscape, right? I'm a mapper since I was a kid. Everything is about National Geographic maps. So once you're at the top of the mountain, you can see your landscape at least a little bit better. That's the goal. The goal is, you want to know yourself, but not just as a monk on a mountaintop. You really want to have practical ways to change things, not overall, by blowing them up, but by small changes where exactly you need help. That's my work, and whether that's through HR, through PR, through all these other ways, books, publications, etc. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give people the tools that I didn't have growing up. It could be for kids in the third world that are very smart and ambitious. It could be for kids in the developed world that just, didn't grow up on the East Coast or the West Coast with parents in tech, finance, law, medicine, whatever. How do you learn about yourself? How do you learn to regulate yourself? And then how do you use that to build something worthwhile in your life?
For sure. So what does that look like? Obviously, like you mentioned, all these different use cases, and everybody's different, right? So like, are you working with people more like on a one-on-one level, or do you have, like you mentioned, that you have like these seminars with tons of people? So how do you make sure that whatever message that you're relaying to your audience, like, is relevant for those people?
Great question. Right? There's not a simple way to have the same message for every audience, because that's garbage. So the point is, one-on-one coaching it's great. I love it. I've always loved it. It's the best way to build a connection, relate to someone, and really help them to put a mirror up to them, but a sympathetic one. It's not like, everything is great, but it's like, look, here's what you're telling me. Here are the words you're using, and also what you're not saying. And I've become incredibly good at just hearing the patterns in people's speech and then showing them, hey, here's what I see. Here are the connections between everything you said. They're usually like, oh my God, like first time we have a conversation and I tell them exactly who they are. Not like, not in some weird way. I'm not reading their fortune, God forbid. It's not like that at all. It's just, look, here are the patterns that I've learned from coaching more than 2,000 people in a decade. And actually, even long before that, being an immigrant kid, trying to understand where the hell am I? What is this culture? What do people mean when they talk to me, right? So it's using what I've collected over almost I'm 40, so almost that long, to help people see, detect, and use and rewire patterns in their life using language and psychology. So that works well one-on-one. That's not scalable. When you talk about HR, you're doing that on a much more complex level within an organization. So yes, using one-on-one conversations strategically, wherein I'm here to benefit you. Tell me what's really going on. I will figure out what the problem is. I will go solve that problem for you to gain your trust. When I do that, I open up more stores of information, and I can go and think about it from a business perspective. I can think about it from a human perspective, HR perspective, whatever perspective, because I've been in those roles. Then I can roll up that information in a thoughtful way for each internal audience. The CFO needs to hear things in that format, the CEO in this other one, CEO, etc. That's how you start to build real change, because you speak what's going on in a person's specific language to help activate the result that needs to happen in order for everyone to be aligned in terms of their incentives. Then you start creating momentum. People are into this. They know this works and benefits them. Then you can create real positive business outcomes based in the right things. in serving people's self-interest before you appeal to something higher.
Makes sense. So in terms of the way that's like when you're working like with companies, like what does that look like? Are you like a full-time consultant, with these companies and you have weekly meetings, or are you only there for like a certain amount of time trying to achieve a goal and that's it? Like what is your typical kind of, company relationship look like?
Great question. I mean, I've been fortunate to work with a pretty wide variety of brands. Some of them are really fast growth companies, your tech startups, 5,000 kinds of companies, finance, healthcare, consumer goods. I've worked with a lot of great nonprofits as well. So each case is a bit different, but of course there are lots and lots of similar patterns, right? Often I would say between 80 and 90% of all problems, if not more than that, are communication. People don't talk enough about what's going on. They don't share information. They hoard information. People are not aware of what's going on. They don't listen to themselves. That's a whole other issue. But lack of circulation, lack of understanding, lack of engagement, because everything has to go through engagement. When you diagnose that, when you help people see that this is a big problem, and you open up new channels, you circulate information, you do it thoughtfully so that you're not letting anyone, let's say, retaliate, because people don't like to be told that, hey, you know what, your communication sucks, right? So if you do it thoughtfully in a human way, then suddenly you see people open up, they share more information, they're more comfortable being in their own skin in their workplace. Then you can create real change. So how does it work? That human connection has to be very strong before we talk about, let's run this program, let's build this strategic function, right? That all happens if there's enough commitment to doing things the right way. Most companies give up after 3 months. Oh, come on, like, why isn't everything different? Well, because you haven't done the hard work, buddy. It's not just me and my HR team. So it's when you have situations like that where a company is really committed to doing things the right way by empowering people from the bottom up, then you can say, top down, more information, let's loop everyone in. Then eventually, yes, there is some kumbaya, meaning there is something mission driven. Then it works. But if you're only doing top down, you're not going to attract much from the bottom because your magnet sucks. It's the wrong magnet. So each case is different, but again, the same patterns emerge usually, within the first 2-3 months.
Makes sense. So, in terms of like, obviously now things have changed since COVID, you have more people working remotely. So how has that changed what you're doing? I'm sure maybe that there's more challenges when it comes to, like you mentioned, communication, hoarding information. I think there is not as much of that since you have more remote teams. So what does that look like for your role?
I would say like this, you have to be able to read the room very well. And I mean, if I have any superpower, that's definitely it. I can read very quickly all the verbal, but most importantly, nonverbal signals. Remotely, in person, it's even that much faster, right? But when you see how people react to certain things, you can very quickly trace what's going on, in their mind, in their life, in their workplace. And it's not that it's always the same. It's just it's the same patterns, right? Humans are pretty straightforward in the end if you really know what to look for. So that's really what it is, right? It's hard, but I have that superpower. If I have any, that's what it is, right? And then how to address problems one-on-one so you don't embarrass anyone, God forbid. And you also know how to do those things in a group because the dynamics are very different. Once you're able to do both of those, it's not a magic answer. You still should go meet people in person. There's just a much more robust and meaningful exchange of information. Again, nonverbal signals just as much as verbal. So you have to have some in-person connection if things are really going to work. And that's what I try to do. Even if most of my 95% of my work is remote, I still make time. I go wherever I need to go, even if it's halfway around the world to meet the group at least one.
But I guess, like, I mean, what I'm getting at is obviously you have companies that are fully remote. You have all these teams that, obviously, you can be working with people in the U.S., being in Israel, but like, in terms of just, you have companies and leadership in different countries or people that are working, I mean, that can be challenging sometimes, right? So it's like, what does that look like? Are you saying, hey, like, let's all meet somewhere and have this collaborative session in person to really maximize efficiency, or is it more of just you might go and meet with this one person who's having these challenges. Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. Last year, I was working with a company that it's a telecoms industry group based between the UK and the US. So, we started. A friend of mine is the CFO there, right? And she reached out to me. She reads my newsletter. Hey, you know what? Can you help us with HR and L&D? Oh, of course, that's my work. So the conversation was, look, our HR person, our HR team is two people. One is part-time. One is in the UK. One is in the US. She needs coaching. Okay, sure, no problem. Like, look, we have an L&D program, but we don't have any actual program. We've chosen people as high potential, but it's meaningless. There's no program. Well, okay, I'll build it for you, right? So I went and we talked to employees, different levels. There's the high potentials, the managers, the senior leadership team, and we built a program on top of that. I delivered it, and then I left the company in a place where the HR person became the L&D person, and she continued. So in that situation, say about 9 months into the project, again, the CFO is my friend, but it doesn't mean it. So I went to a conference where literally the entire company had gathered in Copenhagen, and I met everybody in person. I had both one-on-one sessions, and we went out with different groups, the HR team, this team, that team. It established an absolutely priceless dynamic that no matter how good you are at reading the room, is not going to be as good as meeting with people and just getting human with them, right? And it's not all about the work. Most of it actually isn't about. So when you establish that dynamic and then you go back and you continue working remotely, it's a totally different level of trust and effectiveness because people are like, yeah, he gets me. I know he means well. Let's go. Let's follow his plan.
Makes sense. Yeah, for sure. I think like the in-person people, since COVID, have kind of just forgotten the importance of it. So what would you say is the role of technology when it comes to your business?
Well, okay. On the one hand, it's indispensable because it just makes everything much easier and faster. But on the other hand, it's also it's a fallacy because I think we get to a place where we get intellectually lazy and we just say, you know what, leave it in that project management software. You know what, we're gonna just talk about it at our next, I don't know, Slack event. If you do that, if you don't do the hard human work, meaning like you detect something's off, but you don't follow up, you just wasted a golden opportunity, right? Because that person could have one foot out the door and you didn't address it. You didn't really keep them here. Now they're gone. Okay? And that screws up your plans, that screws up your project management, everything else. Budgets. So it's very important to not over rely on technology because it's a fallacy. You can make things more efficient, you can make them faster, you cannot make them more effective per se. There's a big difference between efficient and effective.
Makes sense. So what would you say is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew before you started your career?
Just keep going. I don't know. I mean, I know it sounds funny, but if anything has, brought me to the place where I am today, if I've managed any sort of success in anything, it's just literally by sticking around long enough, being the one guy who somehow got through all that craziness, learned as much as he could as quickly as he could, and I'm still here, still going. That's it. I think that's the main thing, actually, main lesson in business.
For sure. So if somebody watching this wanted to reach out to you, do you mind sharing your website or social media handle, just best way for somebody to get in contact with you?
Yeah, sure. You can reach out to me directly through email, yuri.kruman@gmail. You can visit my website, yurikruman.com, or my professional website, hrtalentsys.com. That's for HR talent and systems, or LinkedIn or whatever.
Awesome. Well, Yuri, thank you so much for your time, and we're rooting for you.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure
Thank
to
you.
speak.
Thanks. All right. Bye.